So we're webcast today. Welcome to the Board of Behavioral Sciences Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. Today is February 9th, 2018. The time now is 8:41 a.m. and we're in the Department of Consumer Affairs hearing room in Sacramento. For this time, can I have Christina to help us establish a quorum?
Good morning. Deborah Brown, Samara Ashley,
Here.
Christina Wong,
Here.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So the next, we would like to have the staff and the board members introduce themselves. And for the public, you're very welcome to also introduce yourself, and you can come up to the podium, but it's voluntary, yes. So I will start with Steve.
Hi, Steve Sodergren, Board of Behavioral Sciences and Assistant Executive Officer.
Deborah Brown, public member.
Good morning, Samara Ashley, public member.
Good morning, Kim Madsen, Executive Officer for BBS.
Christina Wong, LCSW member.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
Good morning, Christine Whitlisbach, public member.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the Board.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the Board.
And for the public, if you're willing to introduce yourself, please come up.
G.V. Ayers with Gentle Rivers Consulting. I represent the California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors.
Dean Porter, California Association for Licensed Professional Clinical Counselors.
Good morning, Ben Caldwell, American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, California Division.
Kurt Whithelm, licensed marriage and family therapist.
Morning, Kathy Atkins, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Good morning, I'm Jessica Inoue. I'm a field representative with SEIU 10-1, representing city and county employees throughout Northern California. And specifically, we're here today with a group of ASWs and AMFTs, also LCSWs, working for the Department of Public Health in San Francisco.
Good morning, Angela Blanchard from Political Solutions. I represent CAMPT here in Sacramento.
Good morning, Nabil El-Gawuri. I am the new Executive Director for CAMPT.
Hi, Sarah Huckle with Senate Business and Professions Committee.
Becca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California Chapter.
Janley Wong, National Association of Social Workers. In a week and a couple of days, it'll be Happy Chinese Lunar New Year.
I'm Emily Higgs, Senior Policy Analyst for Seneca Family of Agencies.
Good morning, Deborah Sun, Policy Director at Lincoln.
Amy Gonzalez, representing University of Laverne and an LPCC.
Thank you very much. As you can see, we have a very, very full house today. So welcome everybody. So, since we have a really, really good number of participants, and and I anticipate that we will have some wonderful discussion down the road. So I would like to limit the public comment time to about 2 minutes per person, so that we can get through the agenda items, and also making sure that we have chance for everybody to speak. So please keep your comment brief and to the point. Thank you. So let's start with our first agenda item, and that is the discussion of the marriage and family therapist, the AB 93 legislation package, and I'm going to hand it to Roseanne.
Okay, so AB 93 is our board's bill that we started sponsoring. It started running last year. It makes changes to our supervision requirements to be a supervisor, and to requirements to complete supervision to gain toward licensure. And so basic a little history of this bill. It seeks to strengthen the quality of supervision by focusing on supervisor responsibilities, types of supervision that must be provided, and acceptable work settings for supervisees. And it seeks to make the board's supervision requirements more consistent across our license types. It passed through the Assembly last year, moved on to the Senate, and it became a 2-year bill in the Senate due to some concerns that the Business and Professions Committee had about the 90-day rule, which was part of the code section that was being amended in AB 93. And so they had some consumer protection concerns about the 90-day rule and requested some other substantive changes. So the bill became a 2-year bill, and we worked extensively with the committee to develop amendments that strike a balance of preserving the original intent of the bill while making changes to address the committee's concerns. And so at the last Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting, which was October 20th of 2017, this committee here considered several amendments. Most of them were technical in nature, but they were substantive, so they need board approval. And we've been working, based on the comments that came out of that meeting, we've been working ever since to get some language drafted, and it's drafted by Ledge Council, and you can see it in Attachment A, that's proposed language. It needs board approval in order for it to move forward. And two of the most significant changes that came out of that discussion back in October was that the committee recommended a phasing out of the 90-day rule for LMFT and LPCC applicants. The 90-day rule is a provision currently in the board's law for LMFT and LPCC applicants that allow them to count supervised hours gained in between the degree award date and the date the board issues the registration if they apply for the registration within 90 days of the date the qualifying degree was granted. So the draft language that you see in Attachment A, that language would remove the 90-day rule with a 2-year phase-out period. So anybody still in the system, still working through their graduate degree right now and counting on that 90-day rule, they would still have the opportunity to utilize it. After that, after completing graduate study prior to January 1, 2021, the 90-day rule would be removed. So that's the first major change. The second major change was an amendment to law for corporations and private practice. The committee, Business and Professions Committee, had some concerns about the sections of law discussing corporations and private practice. There were some clarity concerns because technically an entity that is a corporation might also be a private practice. So we need some revisions to the law there. The board is currently working on a definition of the term private practice in its exempt setting committee that will be a lot more precise. However, the work of the exempt setting committee is not complete yet, and we'll be introducing some further recommendations in future legislation. So for purposes of this bill, the amendments seek to delineate the requirements for private practice versus entities that are incorporated. And one of the major changes that came out of this is that we are proposing to eliminate the cap on the number of supervisees a corporation may retain. Currently, it's set at 15, so the cap would be removed for corporations. The ratio of 3 supervisees allowed per supervisor would remain the same for both private practice and corporations. So those are the two, the amendments shown in Attachment A are all of the amendments that we proposed making to the bill, including the phase out of the 90-day rule. CAMPT, at the same time, has come up with an alternative proposal to eliminating the 90-day rule, and that can be shown in an email from CAMPT in Attachment B. And so what CAMPT is proposing is that counting experience hours under the 90-day rule could continue if the applicant's work site requires live scan fingerprinting prior to any direct service or client experience being gained. And a representative from CAMPT is here to discuss their proposal and how they came to it in further detail. And we have some, also in the attachments, some letters of support from various agencies throughout California that are in support of CAMPT's proposal. So with that being said, I will open up the discussion.
Thank you, Roseanne, for wonderful description for the 90 days, for the AB 93. First, I want to open up to the board members. Any comments? Not right now. Okay, so we're open for public comments. So, yeah, so maybe, yes, thank you, Kathy. I think this is the right timing. Maybe, this is a good time for you to, to explain a little bit about the proposal from CAMFT.
Sure, thank you. So Kathy Atkins with CAMFT. Much better, okay. So first I want to thank the committee and the BBS for putting this back on the agenda. I think it's an incredibly important issue, so I appreciate that. And I also want to thank Kim and Roseanne for all their hard work. They've been spending just as much time as CAMFT and other stakeholders, so thank you. CAMFT forwarded all you a letter, and I know there's some stakeholder letters articulating what our concern is about removing the 90-day rule as the alternative we're suggesting and the reasoning behind. I have a few extra letters that we got subsequent to me sending, so I'm going to just, if I may, approach you and hand them to you. There are additional letters, but frankly, they do essentially say the same thing. What they're asking is that the committee reverse their October decision to remove the 90-day rule and instead insert the viable alternative that CAMFT and other stakeholders have put together and insert that into AB 93 moving forward. So as Roseanne articulated, the Senate Business and Professions Committee raised in spring some concerns about the time period from post-graduation until registration when pre-licensees are gaining hours at their work locations. The concern raised was that they were doing so without a requirement of there being a live scan during that time. So over the last 8 months, the BBS, CAMFT, numerous stakeholders, the Senate, we've all been looking at various alternatives to removing the 90-day rule so that you can ensure consumer protection while also allowing these pre-licensees to gain the hours that they are working. The main alternative that came through is the one you have in front of you, which is essentially stating that if a pre-licensee who's a post-grad pre-registrant wants to count hours, they need to do so at a facility that does live scan. And what we believe is that this ensures consumer protection, which is the charge of the BBS. It ensures consumer protection by, one, you're looking to see if there's any kind of criminal background, but second, you're also ensuring the continuity of care. You're not facing the possibility or unintended consequences of client abandonment. In addition, unrelated to consumer protection, but the important issue of not exploiting pre-licensees. This is a group of people who historically and already are often exploited. And so to take away these hours that they're able to gain during that time period when there's been zero evidence of any kind of issue would frankly just, again, be further exploitation unnecessarily when you're ensuring consumer protection to begin with. I know there's a lot of people who want to speak, so I know I only have my 2 minutes, but I do want to, as I said, ask that the committee reverse their October decision and instead insert our proposed language, our viable alternative, which has been, like I said, vetted through the Senate Business and Professions Committee. Many stakeholders here had a part in drafting it. The BBS was asked about it and there was no concerns raised. And we believe this will ensure consumer protection while allowing pre-licensees not to be exploited. So I'm here to answer questions, but I presume it's probably better to have other people speak first. So thank you.
So Kathy, before you leave, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So just clarification. So, so the CAMFT proposal is, for the registrant to provide kind of like a self-certification for the agents, from the agency, that they have been live scanned.
What we recommend is that it be certified not just by the pre-licensee, but the agency, sort of how agencies and supervisors now certify that they're doing the supervision. They are self-certifying under penalty of perjury that this person's actually working, that they're getting the hours. So we don't think it should just be the pre-licensee, but also the agency supervisor.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, Samara and then
Actually,
Christine.
Mine was more of just a request, and I know that we do have a representative here from the Business and Professions Committee, so it would be really helpful at some point if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us your thoughts and conversations that you've had, please.
Can I just ask that people speak up just a little bit? It's
Absolutely.
really hard to hear.
Yeah, so, right. So is there anything we can
I
do with
won't
a
whisper,
microphone?
okay.
Nothing. So we need to speak closer. It's a bad demonstration. But, if you can also speak a little slower, I think that would help. So,
How's this? Does that work? Okay.
yes, that works.
Hi, Sarah Huckle with the Senate Business and Professions Committee. In the early discussions around this 90-day rule, stakeholders met with the senator, and the senator's prime concern was the public safety aspect. So while there were two components, the academic and the live scan, he was most concerned with the live scan portion. And we met with MFT representatives who came up with the proposed language and finessed it to make sure that the live scan was indeed completed, and the agency would make the determination as to whether that candidate was appropriate to practice with clients. And the senator is happy, and staff is happy.
So the senator's happy with CAMP's proposal. Okay. I have a question. Yes. Probably not for her, but so how is that going to work in practice? So let's say something comes up on the live scan, then what?
That's going to be up to the employer because they're still not under our jurisdiction. They're not under our jurisdiction until the registration is issued.
So they're under no obligation to tell us whether there was anything.
No, and there's no way to verify. So you could tell me that, yes, I worked in a setting that live scan, and I think by and large most of the facilities do, but I think there's a few facilities or independent practices that don't. But if you tell me that you and your supervisor attest that, yes, under penalty of perjury, we were live scan, we take that at face value. In comparison, if you want to look at how that might work in practice, you can take a look at the CE certification, that renewal time where they self-certify that they've completed the renewal process, and the CEUs. We have a mechanism to come back and audit to verify that. And I'm still having a 27 to 28% fail rate because we're finding that they're not completing their CEUs. So additionally to that, we've also had applicants fraudulently submit hours, and the same kind of thing I've signed under penalty of perjury. So, it's really going to be up to the committee's pleasure and the board ultimately where they think the best consumer protection lays.
So, okay, so they're only attesting that they've been live scanned. They're not attesting to the results of the live scan. Was this discussion had with the senator?
The discussion was that the understanding was that the agencies who do live scan have internal procedures and standards for who may work with clients following live scan. So if someone violated their own internal standards, then they would not be released to work with individuals. It's open to the board and the policy committee as far as whether you want to include any further audit procedures or anything of that nature. That's totally within your discretion.
So since Sarah, you're here, I was just, wondering, because now we have two proposals, on the table. And, and way back when, like Roseanne said, the key concern really is about the consumer protection. So, from the Senate, business and professional committee point of view. Now, because these two proposals are very, very different. So, which proposal do you think that, it can accomplish a bigger consumer protection purpose?
That's entirely up to you. The senator is fine with both the policies at this point.
Thank you. Deb?
So this has been going on for a while. Working with the board, working with your office, and we have some proposals in front of us that the board and negotiated some options, and during that time, were the camped, and I guess it's amped, were they in on these discussions?
I was working with Camped, yes.
You were. Okay, so this is not a big surprise. Okay, that's what I would like to know. Thank you.
I just have another question for Kim, I guess. So how it would work is these people would be live scanned at their agency. They would attest, yes, we've been live scanned. And then when they go to apply for their number, they'd be live scanned again for us, or how?
Yes, they're going to have, because you cannot share live scan results between agencies or entities at all. I mean, even within our own DCA department, if I've live scanned an employee and they go to another board or bureau, they have to live scan with that board or bureau. I don't have access to it. So live scanning at an employment site, although not unusual, I'll never get those results, and their agreement may be different than what I have. There's varying reports that you can get from the Department of Justice depending on what your agreement with them is. Our agreement is that we see, arrests, convictions, and we have what they call a wrap back process, meaning that if after we've printed the licensee or the applicant, if let's say in 2 years, 3 years, or whatever down the period of time, they have another arrest and or conviction, we're immediately notified. I don't know that most employers have that information. I think they screen just up front.
And it's just 90 days.
And it's 90 days. Yeah. So, and the live scan at the, my understanding when I spoke to some facilities is that the live scan is a condition of employment.
Okay. So just thinking ahead theoretically, if we went with that proposal, we would start to get, we would know pretty quickly if there were some agencies who were allowing people to continue working when they weren't passing the standard of our live scan.
Potentially, yes, but we don't track.
For sure.
Well, no, we wouldn't be able to track employment. We don't track employment for anyone. I couldn't give you any names of all the facilities within the states. We just don't know who they are. What the proposal is suggesting is that when the individual sends in their hours to qualify for the licensure exam, that's when that checkbox or that affidavit comes in that would allow them to count the hours earned in that 90-day period. So the hours are earned before the date of the registration is issued. So, and staff is just going to look at the checkbox and say, okay, we count those hours.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying is, and maybe you answer it, but I still don't understand. Okay. So if someone doesn't pass our live scan,
correct,
we would not be able to go back and be like, hey, no, during those 90 days, they were working for such and such.
No, because they're not, the registration hasn't been issued to them. They're not under our jurisdiction. When we get an application, we have two choices. We either issue a registration because they hit all the, you have the transcripts, you have the feeing, you got a clear criminal background. So then you get your registration. If you have a prior criminal conviction, then you go to the other review process. And if we deny, which is the second option on an application, if we deny it, then we can't, none of those hours count. And they haven't historically because we've made a decision on the application.
Right.
So,
but there'd be no way to find out where they were working?
No, because they don't provide that. We take no employment information from anybody until the only time we get any kind of employment information is at the time they submit their hours to qualify for licensure. That could be 2, 3, 4 years down the road.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to clarify about when talking about the agencies that Kim is absolutely right that the agency would be the one looking at the live scan and making a determination about results. But I do kind of want to point out sort of some common sense that an agency does not want to open itself to liability. An agency is not going to hire criminals that they think they're going to get sued for. That is not. I just can't envision many nonprofits or agencies being that ignorant or naive to think that someone with a horrible criminal background would be acceptable. So they do have liability. Second, I don't particularly foresee an agency lying on the self-certification. I would concur that we too see licensees who, under penalty of perjury, mark that they've done their CEs. I think there's a big difference between someone who is marking that they've self-certifying that they've done the CEs versus an agency committing perjury. So I just don't believe that that's really a viable reason not to go forward. Similar to the BBS or any other agency or any other state board, they do have to do a background check. And the BBS, along with other boards like attorneys, like dentists, do allow people to go through with criminal backgrounds. So there's a big difference between someone who 25 years ago might have got arrested for marching in some parade without a permit versus abusing a child 2 weeks ago. So there is a big difference. And so to say that an agency's not going to let someone go through with a criminal background or is, yes, people with criminal backgrounds do get licensed as attorneys, as doctors, as therapists. Generally speaking, I think we have to put faith in the BBS or an agency that they're not going to hire someone or allow someone to get licensed with a criminal background that would be a harm to the consumer. Lastly, I do think an audit makes sense. I think an audit on anything. You audit whether the CEs are provided, you audit whether the hours are really obtained, and I think you can audit whether an agency did do a live scan. Again, I don't put as much faith in every single pre-licensee, but I certainly put faith in an agency that has their reputation, has their nonprofit status, things of that nature at risk. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. I have a question. So, in terms of the live scan, does BBS use a different system, or I think is it a similar pool of data that?
Live scan is a system by which you submit your fingerprints. The information you get back is based on what your agreement is with the Department of Justice. The BBS does not only a California check, which we refer to as DOJ, they also do a federal check with the FBI. So we collect that information both ways. As an employer, it would be up to them if they wanted to do both of those checks or not. My guess is most of them don't do FBI.
So it means that what BBS does is not just about, the California in-state, but probably, for the whole entire country, any of the records that, can happen elsewhere. Okay.
Kathy's point, she is correct. I mean, it's very different, somebody doing what I would categorize as the young and stupid, arrest and conviction, marching in the parade, demonstrating, as opposed to, being arrested for having child pornography on your computer or abusing a child. I mean, there is a big difference. The gray area, I think, that would come is probably those convictions that are related to substance abuse. That's going to be a gray area. I think an employer could easily say, well, that's okay. You've, understand the consequences and the importance of not doing that again, whereas the board may find that there is a demonstrated pattern because we looked at it just slightly differently. So it's both options are viable to the senator and the chair of the BMP committee, and it's really going to be up to the committee and the board which way you want to go. We're happy to do whatever the direction is.
Hi, Ben. Go ahead.
Good morning. Ben Caldwell, AAMFT California Division. We know that this has been a long process. We're certainly grateful for staff's continued involvement in trying to make sure that there is a way forward for the larger AB 93 that has a lot of other good stuff in it. As to the particulars of this issue, you've seen in our letter we're strongly in agreement with the language that CAMP has proposed. Christine, to your concern, the agencies that are doing live scanning are quite often agencies that are placing their pre-licensed therapists in school settings. So they're going to be exceedingly conservative in who they let through into those settings. it's no real skin off their back to say, hold on, we're not going to take a chance on a particular person whose live scan results are questionable. So we don't think there's a particular concern there. If you are concerned about, maybe one rogue agency doing things differently, there are some procedural ways that we would imagine you could get around that. In the application for associate registration, you could simply add a checkbox where you live scanned as a condition of employment. And are you intending to count hours under the 90-day rule? If so, name your employer. So that if something pops on the live scan that you all do, and somebody was saying they were live scanned for their previous employment, you would at least know where that's happening.
Before you get too much further, I'm having a really hard time hearing you. So I just, and I want to hear that because that's important. How did you say to get around? What did you say?
You could add a question on the application for associate registration that is essentially a checkbox. Did you complete a live scan as a condition of your employment, and are you intending to count hours under the 90-day rule? If so, name your employer, so that you would know quite quickly if there's one particular employer or agency where people are getting through with janky live scan results. Now, that's not the only solution for that. We don't think it's a particular likely problem in the first place, but we understand wanting to be extra certain here. We do believe that the larger public protection aim is achieved under the proposed language from our friends and colleagues at CAMFT. What it would mean for continuity of care is better for clients, quite frankly, than the alternative. So we appreciate the continued work on this. We're happy to continue pushing forward with it, and our thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
Again, I'm Emily Higgs with Seneca Family of Agencies. Seneca, if you're unfamiliar with us, is a provider of children's services in over 18 counties in California, serving over 17,000 children a year. We do both DOJ and FBI live scans, so I just want to speak up for those agencies that do both. And we employ over 500 professionals of the healing arts. So we have a vested interest in this. I want to be clear that we're very supportive of CAMP's proposed alternative, and that the 90-day rule represents a mechanism for addressing some of the workforce shortages in this state that are critical. And I'd also like to be clear that the people that we're concerned about right now who are practicing and counting hours that may then not make it through the BBS live scan are still going to be working. So this does not affect that issue. So it really is on the agencies that choose to employ those individuals, and I agree with what's been said already that the bar is set high and those agencies are doing their jobs quite well. I'd also just like to mention that Seneca is a co-sponsor of AB 456, which is seeking to expand the 90-day rule to social workers. We believe that social workers are left out of the equation on this and should be allowed to count those hours in the same way that LMFT or MFTs and LPCCs are as well. So if the board decides to move forward with this alternative proposal, we will include the same language in AB 456. Thank you.
Question?
No, just comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Kurt Whithelm, and I'm a marriage and family therapist, and I've had the fortune of being able to, I've had the fortune to be able to attend a number of the committee meetings leading up to this bill as a concerned licensee under this board's jurisdiction. I am speaking in support of CAMP's amendment because I think that this is something that, as many of the other letters do say, does provide for the best consumer protection when it comes to the nature of what we do as professionals. I'm very involved in the supervision community. I've recently started teaching at the master's level at Pepperdine University, and I see the concern of the long-term effects of this, of potentially even pushing people out of the licensure process due to the extra hurdles that are there, which is a further burden on the licensing process, a further burden on consumer care. And as far as concerns about the levels of the live scans, it is possible to add into this legislation that agencies must perform both the federal and DOJ backgrounds through the live scan, that we don't have to just leave it to the DOJ level.
Hi, come on up, Deborah.
I like how you almost said, come on in. This is a sacred space. Thank you so much for providing the space for a comment. So again, my name is Deborah Sun. I'm remembering to speak slower. I'm from Lincoln. And if you're unfamiliar with our organization, we're a relatively large nonprofit organization, not as large as Seneca. However, we serve Alameda County as well as Contra Costa counties. We are a children, youth, and family service agency, and our services range from being in school-based settings to truancy court to the community and beyond, and home-based settings as well. And our services in the two counties impact over 3,000 families and children a year. So with our organization, we employ, similarly to Seneca, hundreds of folks from the healing arts professions. MFTs represent probably about a third of our workforce, as well as social workers, probably an additional third. We, as Lincoln, strongly support the language, the amended language that's being proposed. And I also do want to mention that we are also co-sponsors of AB 456 in addition to Seneca. One of the priorities of Lincoln is really to ensure that our workforce represents the communities that we serve. This is really, really a deep value of ours. And in order to do so, we work really diligently to try to recruit from the community, to support pipeline opportunities from the community, and also to support sustainability for folks who are entering the mental health work field. In order to do so, we advocate for minimizing disparities. We advocate for minimizing any barriers to access for professional and personal success. And that includes, mitigating any barriers such as being able to obtain clinical hours during this time period, which could pose a deterrence for folks who perhaps cannot afford to work a couple jobs, while gaining hours in addition to getting a paycheck, essentially. So just wanted to share that is one of our priorities, and that's why we are strongly in support of maintaining the 90-day rule, in addition to advocating for social workers to also have that access as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Heimer Silla. I work with the city and county. I also represent part of the union. And I want to address the point that is often missed, and is that if the burden of proof for professionals who show that they are not guilty of anything should be paid by the people who ask in the first place, because otherwise it will return to the workers a return for every live scan. So that is my comment.
Sir?
I'm not quite sure, I think I really have a hard time hearing, your comments. If you don't mind, can you just, briefly repeat your points? And
Yeah. The burden of proof looks like it's put into the workers to show that they are not guilty of something. That's the issue of the scan. Have you been guilty of something, right? So we need now to prove that we are not guilty, but then we need to pay for those scans. So if you pass the burden of the money burden to the agency, fine. But all the time it comes to the workers.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're paying for it anyway now, aren't you? You pay it for employment. Is your employer paying for the live scanner or you?
The workers.
Okay.
And that happened at every turn. If you are a foreign and you come from Asia or Latin America, you need to prove that to the immigration that you are in this country without any disease, you need to pay for the TB test.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the 60s, United States went around the world vaccinating people, and when we come over here, we're guilty, even if we don't have it.
So thank you very much. So I guess at PBS, when we do live scan, we don't have to, the registration, the registrant doesn't have to pay for that portion of it.
No. that's
So the
incorrect.
live scan, so the live scan, when they come into, the placement, it's within, it's between, the student, intern, and the agency. Nothing to do with us. And our part, we don't require them to pay.
No, we do.
Oh,
They are-
pay for the, but
They have to pay for live
initial-
scan.
Right.
They do. That's part of the requirements. It's about $70 to do both the FBI and the DOJ check.
So wherever the legislation go, we need to put the burden of proving people who ask, are you guilty? Prove it.
So your point is, if we decide to do this other alternative, then we should put the burden of the cost on the agency, not the individual.
Right, because, if you are not guilty, how are you going to prove that you are not? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? Hi.
Hi, G.V. Ayers with representing CalPIC. I just speak in support of the of CAMP's alternative language, amendment language, and we would request that, obviously, if the committee and the board accept that, then also we would mirror that in the LPCC Act as well, the pertinent provisions there.
I think GV makes a good point. If the committee does decide to go this route, then not only do we do it for LPCCs, but I think it needs to happen for social workers. Because our goal has been parity where it's possible.
Any other comments?
Good morning, Angela Blanchard on behalf of the California Association of Marriage Family Therapists. I just want to thank our colleagues in the audience for providing the comments today regarding CAMP's alternative. And I want to strongly, respectfully request that you consider approving today's alternative. We believe that it strikes a balance between greater consumer protections while addressing workforce issues, and all of the reasons that my colleagues have already stated, we are in strong support. I do want to, just underscore again, we spent months working on this alternative with the Senate Business and Professions Committee to come up with a balance that would provide those consumer protections. And without the amendment, CAMP is going to have significant concerns with AB 93 moving forward. So again, respectfully request that we move AB 93 forward with that amendment in place. And thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. So I have a quick question. So since you have been talking about mobility and portability, so how many so Kim, maybe you can answer that. So how many other states that that's having intern count that 90-day rules, is it something unique to California, or some other states also have the same practice?
To our knowledge, California is the only state that has this rule.
So in your opinion, how does it, affect, the mobility down the road? Because now, we're talking about not just opening up to the MFT, LPCC, and also the social workers.
Mobility down the road. So I ruled the world, and everybody would look at the proposal that we're going to be running through the Portability Committee, where you treat an individual that's licensed coming into your state as a licensee and not a brand new applicant. That proposal omits looking at specific hours. that qualified you for the exam. So if that scenario were to happen across all 50 states, it's not a problem. If it doesn't, then I think that some of the licensees might have struggles moving from California to other states. So there is sort of that teeter-totter, that balance. That being said, sitting on 2 of the national committees to develop portability proposals, the overwhelming sense is that we need to treat licensees moving from one state to another state as licensees and not as a brand new applicant climbing that Mount Everest to get to licensure. So that being said, in terms of application to the board, and if we were to accept CAMP's proposal and move forward, I would recommend that we extend it to all the license types. If the committee's desire is to ask the board to audit periodically, I think it's important to understand that we don't have the staff to do that. And that if we're going to do that, then we're going to have to add staff, which then puts a fiscal on this bill. And essentially what this ends up turning out to be, sadly, is that this is a bill now that is, rather than the discussion about improving supervision, the quality of supervision, making allowances for increasing the ability for these individuals to count supervised hours, such as the triadic supervision and the checks and the balances that the supervision committee works so hard to put in place to better prepare these individuals for independent licensure. I mean, that's not even being talked about right now. It's all focused on the 90-day rule, and that's sad. I did not want this bill to become a 90-day rule, but that's where we are. So it's really, I mean, is that where our focus is going to be? Are we going to just really focus in on the 90-day rule and that's all we're doing? Or are we going to look at the greater good of the bill? Is the greater good of the bill the supervision changes? You know, I don't know. And I think it comes down to how strongly the committee members and the board members feel about that 90-day rule, which was really put into place for reasons that we could determine on activities and occurrences at the board years and years and years ago. We don't hard card anymore. We get live scan results typically within 2 to 3 days. Our backlogs, now that we're fully staffed, don't occur even in a peak, what we call the avalanche season, which is the application volumes that come right after graduation. They're still getting registrations out within 45 days max. The biggest, Steve did some data just poking around, and the biggest delay is just getting the transcripts, but even those are starting to come in within 2 weeks. So I can appreciate, you know, the angst of having something for a period of time, and then, you know, there's the thought that it's going to go away and it's going to delay licensure and it's really going to impact, you know, clients and such, but clients come and go all the time. Part of the psychotherapy process is to transition your client out. You know in advance that you're not going to be able to work, so you should prepare for that. So I see arguments on both sides. I think there's an argument to keep it. The 90 days, I think there's an argument to get rid of it. I don't know of any other healing art board that allows unlicensed individuals to treat people. Yes, they still are going to treat people because you're in an exempt setting, and you know if they're working for a government agency, there's not a lot that we can do with that. But if you get really simplistic, you don't put a 15-and-a-half-year-old behind the wheel without a permit, and even if you do, they have to have some supervision. They can't drive independently until they're fully licensed. At the end of the day, our mandate's consumer protection. But at the same time, it is hard for those trainees and interns and registrants and associates to get their hours. It's difficult. They work really hard. Life circumstances happen. Employment is either wide open or not wide open. So long and the short of it, yeah, I'm going to do whatever you guys ask me to do.
Yes. Okay. So
let's go for Christine and then, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, everyone here knows that I was all for getting rid of the 90-day rule because I had a huge concern about consumer protection. And I've talked about that from the beginning. But these arguments are pretty strong. I mean, I think we have to be reasonable. I think we have to balance consumer protection with the needs of the people of California. We do need a lot of mental health services, and this opens that up a little bit if we do have the 90-day. I mean, I think as long as people are protected by being scanned, I think it's something we should consider. With your concern about the fiscal impact, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm missing something here, but if we did Ben's proposal where they had to state who they were working for, if they were working under the 90-day rule, I mean, that could be our audit right there if we start to see problems. So I don't see why we would have to hire more people.
Well, the staff doesn't look at that right now.
But we could.
We could, but that's going to require staff, much like I have one person that does the CE audits right now.
But why would we have to audit if we didn't even look at it unless there was a problem?
We're not going to know if there's a problem because I have, in the MFT unit, we have 4 different people looking at applications.
Yeah.
So the only way for them to know that there's a problem is to, you're going to need to track it. So if everything was coming across one desk, I could see that ABC Center, all of a sudden you're looking and it's popping up as a red flag. But if that's spread across 4 individuals, that might not come to our attention as quickly as it was if it was going through one person. I don't have an issue in terms of do we need to audit. I'm simply stating that, understand that well, I think by and large, probably 80% of the agencies are going to, be forthright and honest with us. That's fine. I can live with the 20% that might be a little shaky, or the private practices who don't live scan. I can live with that. Alternatively, as I'm sitting here thinking, we require them to send in the live scan form with the application. So maybe we just ask for that form from the employer, and that comes with their application.
Okay, there you go.
And that's just something they would staple to the application. I'm going to look at my evaluators. Is that something that would fly with you guys, if in terms of counting hours? Would that make it easier to say, hey, I can count these hours or not count those hours? So in our initial applications now for registration, typically what they do is they send in the copy of the live scan form. What if we, at the time they submitted the application for the clinical exam, they submit a copy of that live scan form that they did at the time, but to include that with the application for the clinical licensure?
Yeah,
Exactly. But, that's when you count the hours. You don't count them until they come in for clinical licensure, correct? Okay, so maybe that's what we do.
Yeah, that'd be
Yeah. I would like to look at ask the individuals from Seneca and Lincoln. So when you do the live scan form, is it a form that you would be easily able to provide a copy of? They're nodding their heads, yes. Okay. So I would have confidence in that. Well, they could redact. I would just want to see the form. I mean, they can redact all the.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that would be my other concern, what Paula was saying too, is that so it's a burden of the actual applicant to keep holding on to that for 3 years from now and then hand it in. And if they can't get it, I don't know how long the agency keeps those records. And if we're ever going to try to audit that, I don't know, 6 years, 7 years down the line, we try to look back to see if they were fingerprinted and the agency says, well, we don't have those records anymore.
Well, then they don't get to count the hours.
Because
kind of like the weekly logs.
Well, and then we're talking like we do the no longer interested, so we get rid of all their fingerprint stuff.
If
when they leave the agency. So if they worked for the agency for, let's say, a year, they left. 4 years down the line, they came back, and we're trying to audit that, saying, well, we can't go to the agency and say, do you have the fingerprints? We're like, no, we don't, because we're not supposed to
No, I'm asking for a copy of the form.
Well, yeah, no.
Right, and that's it's just a
yeah.
piece of paper that says, hey, I did that. That's what you
Yeah.
submit when you do it.
Yeah.
So whether they're not with the agency any longer or not, it's the same as, in my mind, and I'm going to have if I'm really going off the rails, please let me know. But why couldn't they just send a copy of that piece of paper that demonstrates that, yeah, I fingerprinted for employment?
Well, I mean, we have a hard enough time getting some other records from them. So I know 3 years down the line, if they don't have it and they try to go back to the agency, then yeah, I mean, we would end up with a situation where, sorry, you can't count those.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Right, but that would be a way for us to implement the camp solution without it being an unnecessary burden on the staff, honestly. So if that were the compromise that we came to, I would be in support of that.
So I do have, another layer of thoughts. So now the 90-day rules, now we're under the assumption that, when the student intern was placed in the agency and upon graduation, they stay and work in the agency so that they can continue, for the services, right? Correct? And I'm wondering, how often, especially about the nonprofit, how often that they actually, will stay there, because some of the agencies hire a lot of the interns and probably, for the paid position, not as much. So I think that's one layer. So, and then the second thing is that if you're talking about self-certification, and they might be, submitting, the agency, for the, during their internship, and yet they may quit, and then change their job, and then what's going to happen?
Well, what I'm asking is because for employment, they have to live scan. There's a form.
Right.
Okay, and the agency has a copy of the form, or at least gets notification. Ours is triplicate. Is yours triplicate as well? You have 3 parts, okay. So one part always stays with the individual that's printed. Right. And then that's the part I'm saying photocopy and send it in. And so that would demonstrate that they were fingerprinted prior to employment, which aligns with CAMP's proposal.
Right.
And then we could see that. If the applicant can't provide that when they submit their hours, then you can't count your hours. Right. End of story.
Right.
So that's sort of an efficient way of verifying that they were printed during that 90-day period. Right. So it's going to be incumbent upon the individual to retain that record. Much like you have to keep your logs.
Right.
You have to keep your supervisor responsibility statements. And the only place that we're going to worry about is where those first hours are gained.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So that photocopy that says, yeah, I live scan, I mean, it's going to be pretty quick because there's a date on there, and then there's a date that we've issued the registration. So you can tell that they were printed before the registration was issued. So that's not going to be.
That doesn't change the fact that, if that doesn't change, let's say if, they go and work in the other agency, at least you have that live scan record that they have done the live scan and they are, this is the result.
Right. So that's the only, sitting here thinking on the fly, that's probably the most efficient way of implementing CAMP's proposal without adversely impacting our staff.
And then I have the second thought, since we brought up about the social workers. Mm-hmm. So how feasible it is to insert, another language, in the bill and not jeopardizing the possibility of moving forward.
How feasible is it to insert the social work language into?
Say like the similar, because right now the social workers doesn't have the 90 days rule, and that's what the stakeholders has been talking about.
We could mirror it. We could mirror the language. However, it was for LPCCs and LMFTs, it would just be placed in there.
Right, and Sarah, thank you. Yeah. I was just about to invite you to come up. So what what is your opinion? The possibility of getting the bill passed the BNP committee with the addition of the social workers, section.
You guys have plenty of time. We're not planning on beginning bill hearings until earliest the end of March. So.
Okay, so it would be feasible for us to blend the 456 into this bill?
Yes.
And so in your opinion, that likely that it will fly in the committee? And I'm not asking you to predict, but, you know, from the legal opinion.
The chairman of the committee, Senator Hill, is fine with the concept of the language, well, the exact language that was offered by Camp. So I can't speak for the other members of the committee, but committee staff has no concerns at this point.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Very thorough discussion. Everybody's taking a deep breath. So now, any other public comments? Becca.
Becca Gonzalez, NASW. I just want to point out, as far as blending the language into AB 93, you would have to talk to the author's office, to Tony Thurman, because Tony Thurman might want to retain ownership of that issue.
We've worked with that office on 456. I don't think it would be a problem to work with them.
So, any other discussion? So, do we have any, which direction we're pointing to us? Board members? Deb, yeah.
I have a question. It's probably going to be for Ms. Huckle. If you could come back up, please. I'm sorry. And Roseanne. So during this process, and when we look at our notes from the last time we voted on this, we voted on the step down, 2-year step down, which was what was negotiated. Is that correct?
Excuse me. Are you speaking about the other language in the bill?
I'm talking about the bill before.
Correct.
When we were talking about it, remember this was the issue, and so that was the consequence or the negotiated deal, let's just put it out there, for this bill, so that we could get our supervision bill, which is, as Ms. Mattson said, really what this is we're talking about here, and all the work that went into that bill. I mean, years. So my question is, here we are today, and what has transpired, or who was left out of the conversation between last time and today, that Camp's voice, were they heard and ignored? Were they heard and said, that's not the way, we're not going to negotiate what you want? I just don't understand. There seems to be a disconnect from all the work that was done between your office and the board to come up to the conclusion that you guys negotiated. And then here we are today, and it seems like we're being brought forward a whole new world here, that what I'm trying to find out is what they're arguing, something that was argued between your office and the board, and they were told that's not going to happen. And so now they're making a last-ditch effort to have that heard. Or was their conversation, were they included in the conversation? Was their concerns listened to? And they too agreed on moving forward with the 2-year step down. And now we've just decided that today, when we're going to vote on it again, that we might as well get in there one last time and hope to change this deal. I need to know where we are.
And I don't want to speak for Camp particularly as far as the timing goes, but I want to communicate to all of you that legislation is very much a process, and everything that was communicated prior to and during the initial negotiations was true and accurate. I was approached by Camp a while ago, but the exact language that we're discussing now was not finalized, I believe, as of the last policy committee when we were discussing this issue. They approached me with this concept several months ago, but after it had been determined to be a 2-year bill. The initial discussions with the senator were that he wanted to make sure that clients were protected primarily from the live scan aspect, not necessarily the academic check that went along with the registration. There was no compromise option at that time. It was 90 days or not. So the development of this language happened over the last couple months between myself, Camp, And then the final language was brought to the senator a couple weeks ago. And I don't know what the strategy was for camp to bring in other parties as well, but I then looped in Kim and Roseanne so that it was discussed amongst all stakeholders.
And so now it is the position of your Senator Hill's office that he can go either way. Okay.
We take input from stakeholders on all bills, so my job is to communicate with anybody who reaches out and has concerns and ideas. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Kathy?
Thank you for your question. I think it's a fair one. I was not there in October, unfortunately, so I can't speak to the exact conversation. But in October, there were numerous general concepts that were forwarded to the committee. Between October and now is when language was discussed, put together, amended, chewed on, and this is what has been now presented to the committee. So that is two different, or it's sort of oranges and apples from October to now. Thank you.
Yeah, Kim?
Roseanne or Christy, so assuming that we're going to go with the camp language, would it be better to put in in the bill that you have to submit a copy of that live scan, or is that going to be a regulation?
I think we should put it in the bill.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let me again change the topic a little bit since we chew on it so much. So now there's another part of it, that let not forget about, the amendments for the corporation and private practice. Yeah, so any comment about that part of it? We beat the 90 days rule to death. So, Kathy?
I just wanted to say that we worked with the BBS on this issue, and the concerns were raised by the committee, but we deferred to the BBS I know Roseanne's been working really hard on this issue, so we did defer to the BBS on what their opinion is.
So, and I would like to say at this time, it's not just the corporation issue, anything. So aside from setting the 90-day rule portion the way it's drafted in this attachment A, it looks like a ledge council draft. Anything that's in italics or strikeout is a change, and a lot of the changes are substantive, although relatively minor, but still substantive. So if anybody has any comments, this basically can't move forward without board approval as it is. So anybody that has any comments about anything in this bill, aside from the 90-day rule, that's open for discussion as well.
It seems like the supervision committee has worked so hard, and we've seen this language over and over and over again, and I'm like, oh, I thought I looked at it, and
you have, but it has changed.
It still has changed.
Since the last version, even in October.
Because we talked about, all these language changes and stuff like that.
So we want to make sure before the board approves it that any concerns are heard so that we can potentially address them.
Right. So not just about the corporation and private practice, but the whole, the amendments that we made incorporated from our last P&A discussion now is in front of us. So, and that comes back to Kim's point that, that it's not just about the 90 days rule, but it's really about the entire package. So any public comments or board member comments about the amended languages?
And then I will say that I've reviewed the draft, aside from the 90-day rule, and I do have some minor changes that I'd like to propose that I'm going to point out. All of them are very minor, but I will point them out quickly. On page 5 of the language, of the actual proposed amendments, not the page number of the packet. Very bottom of the page, last sentence where it's talking about on line 8, it's talking about a healthcare practitioner. I'm going to ask that be changed to healthcare provider because that's how it's referred to in section 2290.5 of the Business and Professions Code. So for consistency, I'm going to ask for that change. On page 14, there's just a place where we need to insert the word the. It's in subsection B, 3 lines from the top, where it's talking about the applicant is there after granted the associate registration by the board. It just needs to say that. That's non-substantive. Page 20. I just want to point out that the bottom of the page, the reference to section 4980.43.3 needs to be renumbered, so there is going to be some renumbering. And then on pages 91 and 92, that subsection D, it's just not exactly corresponding. It's the same section as an MFT law, but it's the way that it's drafted there. I think Ledge Council just got mixed up a little. It's slightly incorrect, so I'm just going to ask that they make it exactly like the corresponding provision in MFT law. And then I will point out in the CAMP's language, in their proposal, it is missing the sentence at the very end of 4980.43H as it currently is. The last sentence should say, an applicant shall not be employed or volunteer in a private practice until registered as an associate by the board. I think it's really important to keep that sentence because it serves as reinforcing that, yes, you're having the 90-day rule, but it's the private practice provisions still apply.
Any objections to that, Kathy? Because it's changing part of the recommended CAMP language, by adding that private practice element.
I'm sorry, can you repeat it?
Sure. It's just that on your letter in proposed 4980.43H, the original language, it says an applicant shall not be employed or volunteer in a private practice until registered as an associate by the board. I would recommend keeping that.
That's fine. I don't have it in front of me actually, but I didn't even realize I crossed it out.
Yeah, it's not included in that, is that substantive?
Oh, I just put the substantive.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
So Roseanne, for practical purposes, I see it's numbered 1, number 2. Would we put number 3, applicant wishing to count the hours in that 90-day period? We need to have language for if we're going to. Yeah.
I'd like to see whatever we agree on today. If we end up going with CAMP's proposal, what I'd like to see is the whole section in context, because the board is going to need to approve it in a couple of weeks. So I would like to see a Ledge Council or some sort. It doesn't have to be Ledge Council, but some sort of a draft. And also 4980.43H is gone. It's struck. Right now, the 90-day provision that's in our draft is, I think it's in subsection A or B. And I think this piece would float right into there. I think that it would be fine, but I'd just like to see the whole section, have a copy of the whole section for the board, if that's possible.
Christina?
Yes.
We need to see that for our meeting next week, or else
2 weeks.
The meeting's on the 22nd.
Okay, sorry, in 2 weeks, right? Okay, perfect. Because in order to make the deadline for 2-year bill, so.
So were you asking me if I could? I mean, I could have it to you Monday.
Okay.
Again, it was more just taking the pertinent language and not all the.
Yeah. I just, for the purposes of this, I'd just like to have the board be able to see it. I don't know that we'll be able to get another Ledge Council draft by then, but I'd like the board to be able to see the whole section.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So looks like, I think we pretty much, completed the discussion. So I would need a motion. So Sabina, help us with that.
So it is complicated, and it has been a really lively and extensive discussion. You might consider taking the motion in 2 parts, as you've already put in your memo. You have number 1 as phase out of the 90-day rule, the Ledge Council proposal versus the CAMP proposal, and then the amendments to the corporations and private practice section. I don't know if you want to kind of take them both separately, and then so you can have a motion for, Or whether you're going to recommend that to the board.
Yeah, I think, and just for all of the language in general, not just the corporations.
Right, and the other proposals. So you might have three.
90-day corporations and then everything else.
Right,
Okay.
right. So it might be easier to take the non-substantive and slightly substantive edits to the bill shown in the Ledge Council draft first, whether or not the committee's going to recommend that to the board to accept those. And then you also have number 1 and number 2 in the memo.
So, board members, you know, are we all, have a feel where you're going to stand? Where committee would recommend? Go ahead, Christine.
I can't even think about this until we have a 5-minute break to go to the restroom. I'm serious.
All right, so let's take a
Thank you.
quick, quick 5 minutes break, and then we'll come back and then do the motion. So the time now, 9:57. Let's come back in about 10:05. Yes, what? Nine, and we are about to resume our meeting. So I think what we left off is really about discussing about the motion. So, motion, Christine.
Okay. And I apologize. I just have a sense that there might be more discussion after the motion. So thank you.
We know what coffee does to us.
Okay. Oh, I don't need that. We're going to do 3 motions, as we discussed before. I have a first motion, and Roseanne has helped with the language, so she's going to read it.
Okay, so the first motion would be regarding the 90-day rule in Business and Professions Code, section 4980.43. And the motion on the table would be to move to recommend that the board consider adopting CAMP's proposal and integrating it into 4980.43. And what we would ask CAMP to do is for our board meeting, provide a draft that integrates the live scan form to the board that the board wanted to require, or the committee wanted to require, integrate the sentence that I referred to about no private practice until issued a registration by the board. And then also moving the proposed language from 4980.43H to 4980.43B.
That's the motion.
That's the motion, and that's the first. That's the motion. Okay. So I would like to open discussion. Deb, you have. Oh, I need a second.
I'll second.
Tomorrow, second. Now we have discussion and public comment. So, Deb.
I just want to be real clear and make sure that I clearly understand what I'm doing. Last P&A, the committee, which was myself, and I'll only speak to myself, voted to get rid of it, the 90-day rule, or at least do the step down to the 90-day rule. So here it is today, and I'm being asked to change my mind. Is that correct? I mean, if we accept the CAMP proposal, or language, I should say, as you suggested in your motion, I'm asked to reverse that decision. Is that correct? If I voted for the CAMP proposal that you just said in the motion, I would be changing my vote. Is that correct?
That's accurate, yes.
Yes. I'm asking Roseanne because she's the ledge person.
Well, it's my motion, so I'm telling you, yes.
Okay, so I would be going against what I voted for the last time. This was before the P&A. Okay. In that proposal by CAMP, so that I can hear myself speak and you can say, yes, that's true, we are going to include in the CAMP proposal that they provide a live scan piece of paper proof that fingerprints have been taken, regardless of what setting. Is that correct? That there will be proof somewhere along the line when they send in their package for registration number, Okay, see, I'm confused
Okay,
on what
so
this.
so at some point in the process, they will provide, if they want to count those 90, those hours earned in that 90-day time period,
Yes.
they're going to need to provide a copy of the live scan form that demonstrates that they completed the live scan process with an employer during that 90-day period. Now, whether that be one employer or several employers, they're going to need to provide that copy. We could have it when they submit for their clinical hours, or they could provide it upon registration when they submit their registration package to us. We can kind of work those nuances out, but they are going to have to demonstrate that they had live scan during that time period. Otherwise, the hours are not going to be counted.
So the dates have to coincide with
Yes,
that?
ma'am.
Okay. I wanted to just make sure that there's a legal support for whatever way I vote. Okay, thank you.
Ben?
Ben Caldwell, AMFT California. This is perhaps splitting hairs, but just in the language of the motion, Roseanne, you had included the word consider. And so I'm wondering whether the motion is for the full board to adopt the camped language that's been recommended, or think about adopting the camped language that's been presented.
Well, so the committee can only make recommendations to the board.
Sure.
So they can recommend this language for the board to consider.
How about the recommended the board consider adopting? Does that work?
It's not going to change the result at the full board meeting.
Yeah, no, that's like I said, it's possibly splitting hairs. I just wanted clarity on how direct the recommendation was.
Okay, we can say consider adopting.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right, so is any other discussion?
I guess I just want to make a comment towards Deborah's concerns. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
I don't think we just didn't have this compromise language to even consider when we made our last vote. And I was very, very strong against getting rid of the 90-day rule because I was concerned about consumer protection. But in light of the new proposal, which we didn't even have before, that's where I'm coming from with my motion.
I just want to make sure that the language in the motion addresses my concern from my vote.
So I want to just also give you feedback. I think, last time, part of the discussion was about the disparity, among the licensees. And I think what's on the table today that, that we do address, we do, make the license types, more consistent. And if we apply to all, then I think I can live with that.
Okay, can I just comment on that? Because I was not concerned about the disparity between.
It was me. I was speaking for myself.
And my motion doesn't even speak to that. So I just want to make that clear. Okay.
And I want to echo, we didn't have this language until after the P&A. And from my perspective, I'm with the discussion and how we're going to verify and how we're going to do it. I'm comfortable with it. I'm okay. So, and I think what you just saw is an example of when we all put our heads together, how we can figure it out. So,
yes, Kathy?
I just wanted to clarify, Roseanne and I should have done this during the break, so I apologize. What H moving to B, I didn't know what that meant.
So right now, 4980.43H is like way down in the section and it's all struck. We've in the language of AB 93, as shown in attachment A, aside, ignoring the fact that it takes out the 90-day rule or phases it out, the phase out right now is in 4980.43B. So I'd like to just lift your language, have your proposal, yes.
Okay.
Lift it from H to B and put it.
So just technical.
Yeah, and we can work together on.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
I want to clarify my comment earlier. It's not that I'm not concerned about the disparity between the professions. I'm less concerned about that as I am about consumer protection. And that's what my motion speaks to. So I didn't mean it to sound that way.
No. Let's call to the vote.
Deborah Brown?
Yes.
Tamara Ashley?
Yes.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So I think this is a pretty wonderful discussion, and hopefully, we'll move it forward. Oh, that's right. I thought we just vote for one. Okay, motion number 2.
Okay, so motion number 2 is to recommend that the board consider accepting the corporation language as drafted in attachment A.
Any comments?
I'm happy to
Oh,
make
sorry.
that motion.
Thank you. Samara.
Samara, number 1, and I need a second.
I'll second.
Christine, second. Any comments from the board member? Public comments? Okay, ready for vote?
Deborah Brown? Samara Ashley?
Yes.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And then we move forward to the third one, the private practice, right?
Yes, and then so the third motion is to recommend that the board consider adopting all other amendments aside from putting aside the 90-day rule and the corporation language, all other amendments shown in attachment A.
I so move.
I'll second. So Samara and Christina. Any other discussion? Okay. Christina?
Deborah Brown? Samara Ashley?
Yes.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So, done. This is good. All right. So let's discuss the next bill, which is the required degree program content for LPCC's assessment and diagnosis. And Roseanne?
Okay, so moving along. So this next agenda item was brought to us by some stakeholders and CalPIC. And so we put it on the agenda for today. And what it has to do is with a recent bill that the board ran about assessment and diagnosis core content requirement for LPCC applicants. So in late 2015, the board discussed that there was a need to tighten licensing requirements for professional clinical counselors to ensure that applicants possess degrees that are designed to lead to licensure as an LPCC. The board was concerned because it was receiving a lot of applications, particularly from out-of-state candidates, and the degrees that we were seeing were not specifically necessarily designed to prepare the individual for licensure as a professional counselor. Some examples of the types of degrees we see in this realm are behavior analysis, art or dance therapy, human relations, rehabilitation counseling, things like that. So the board had some discussions, and the first thing that was considered was designating specific degree titles as acceptable or not acceptable to LPCC licensure. However, after a lot of discussion and stakeholder feedback, ultimately the board concluded that a degree really should be evaluated based on its content, not by its title. There's a lot of different variations within degree programs from one school or another, so the title doesn't necessarily reflect what's in the degree. Instead, the board decided that there are 2 LPCC core content areas that the board agreed are fundamental to a clinical counseling degree. And those are the core content areas of assessment and the core content area of diagnosis. So the board recommended that these 2 core content areas be designated as not eligible for remediation for both in-state and out-of-state degrees. In other words, an LPCC applicant must fully meet those 2 core content areas with no exceptions, meaning a new degree would be required for licensure if the requirement is not met. All other core content areas remain eligible for remediation. This was run as a bill in 2016. It was AB 1917. It became effective on January 1, 2017. So it's been in effect for about a year now, and we've had some concerns raised. The licensing unit has encountered some situations, especially with in-state applicants, who were denied licensure due to the degree not containing the full number of assessment and diagnosis units. In some cases, the applicants have noted that they were not aware of the new requirement when it became effective, so they had no chance ahead of time to remediate. In other cases, schools have argued that their degree should qualify because it falls under the provisions of, they're using the older degree requirements, and they thought they had until December 31st, 2018 to bring those degrees up to current. attachment, we did a little bit of research with our licensing staff. Thank you very much to them for doing that. They took a look at each in-state applicant by school and degree program that was denied a license through October 2017 due to the degree being deficient in assessment or diagnosis. And that's shown in attachment A. You can see in attachment A the school and then the degree title, number of applicants denied, and what core area it was deficient in. And there were 21 applications that were denied there. We also had the licensing unit poll the out-of-state applicants that were denied through October 2017 due to the same deficiency. And you can see those results in attachment B. We don't have it by school, but we have it by degree title and missing content area. So we wanted to have a discussion today. It was asked that we have this discussion to see if there's anything that the board can or wants to do about this. The first option would be to take no action. If the process, you can see the degrees that are listed there that are deficient. If the committee feels that those are not primarily LPCC degrees, that might be come into play with the discussion. The second option would be to remove the prohibition on remediation of assessment and diagnosis core content areas for in-state applicants. The problem of degrees not being intended to lead to LPCC licensure is more common for out-of-state degrees. Out-of-state applicants are able to remediate a much higher number of core content areas, up to 6, or in-state can remediate either 2 or 3 core content areas depending on when the degree was earned. Originally, the concern when we originally brought it was the out-of-state applicants. The third suggestion would be to consider amending the law to allow a little bit more time for in-state applicants. And I proposed some language, and I only proposed it for in-state applicants at this point. Under this proposal, the board would offer a one-time grace period for in-state applicants who are missing the coursework, but who are intending to apply for licensure down the road to apply. Under this, the in-state applicants who were previously denied would be able to reapply for that 1-year limited period. So with that being said, I'd like to open it up for discussion.
Any discussion by the board members? So we got 3 options up here. No comments yet. Okay. No, go ahead.
Amy Gonzalez from the University of Laverne. I oversee the school and family-based counseling portion, and as also an LPCC. We want to thank you so much for addressing this issue, because we are in favor of option 3, as it would address those students who were left unable to complete the pursuit of their licensure as of the January 27 amendment. The affected Laverne graduates are actually only those who completed the approved 48-unit program between fall of 2012 and summer of 2013. We only have 2 students who have applied and been denied, but we've been the gatekeeper for this and have probably another dozen or so that we've stopped because we knew the application would not be approved. There's probably 20 to 25, we estimate, that if option 3 is the way you choose, will be able to complete their licensure. So we greatly appreciate what you can do. And this is only speaking from the University of Laverne. I understand there were other universities involved as well, educational institutions. Both our 60-unit program and 48-unit program were approved, and it was only those students within the gap who took their PPS credential and their educational counseling masters and were picked up by K through 12 sites and started working, and then intended to come back and complete those additional units, LPCC applications.
Prior to the implementation of the LPCC licensure, what did your degree program prepare the students to do?
As well, the initial degree, which goes way back, we are talking forever, was an educational counseling degree. That degree was evolved And it still is an educational counseling degree, and we offer the school and family-based concentration. As of this point, students can pair off and graduate with the 48 units with their PPS credential and become academic counselors, or they can continue on for the 60-unit degree and gain both dual credentials, so overall. The reason we have that gap is as of students as early as spring of 2012 who started the program would automatically decide to go into that 60-unit program. So those aren't the problem. The situation has been just the gap students.
So initially the program was not designed to lead to licensure whatsoever.
That was before the licensure
But
existed.
before the licensure existed.
Once the licensure came into play, that program was put into place and addressed all of the curriculum involved.
Okay.
Thank you. Dean?
Dean Porter, California Association for LPCCs. I want to thank staff for doing such a good job in presenting this issue and coming up with some viable options. While not allowing diagnosis or assessment to be remediated post-degree seemed like a good idea at the time, we have since learned about other counselors in the pipeline who plan to apply under the requirements that apply to those who began study prior to 2012 and complete it before December 31st, 2018. So that section of the law has allowed counselors to remediate any 2 courses post-degree. So there are graduates who have been completing assessment or diagnosis post-degree, but in 2017, the rules changed and their path to licensure has been closed. These counselors feel that the BBS has imposed this new requirement retroactively, and it's not fair. While attachment A indicates 21 applicants who've been denied licensure due to this deficiency in either assessment or diagnosis, there are many more in the pipeline who have been discouraged from applying. In fact, I know of a graduate of CSU San Bernardino, which is not even on the list. She was denied since October when that list was compiled. And she said there are about 20 others in her cohort who were working to meet these requirements, thinking that December 31st, 2018 was their deadline. And indeed it is, as in current law. I think that the proposed option 3 would give these applicants a one-time grace period where they could still apply for licensure, even if they have remediated assessment or diagnosis post-degree. And this would resolve the current in-state problem. Attachment B indicates denials of out-of-state applications due to a deficiency of assessment or diagnosis. Perhaps we can discuss these out-of-state degrees in more depth at a subsequent meeting. It's devastating to learn that you need to earn a whole new degree because one course is missing or inadequate and you're not allowed to remediate. I'd like to just talk with the evaluators and drill down a little bit to see if these out-of-state applications or transcripts had an assessment course, but it didn't quite match what our definition is, or if the assessment course was missing altogether. I just think it might make a difference. So I think I'll propose that for a new agenda item. Unless you want to take it up today, but you probably don't.
Just a couple of comments. Just from a historical perspective, when we sat down and we really talked about all of this, the discussion centered around what type of license we were trying to implement when we were looking at, why the LPCC license was brought into California. And it was to be on par with the other clinical mental health. And as a result of staff seeing a number of degrees coming in, remediating well more than just assessment and or diagnosis, it felt that they were piecemealing a degree that was going to afford individuals, probably without really sufficient training, out in the field and treating consumers in California. And then that felt like, well, that's not really meeting the intent of the law. So that's really where we evolved from, okay, if you have this degree title, to we'll look at assessment and diagnosis as being the core components of a clinical license. So that's sort of the history for the committee members when we looked at revising the law. And really, when we brought the law to the board and the committee back when we revised it, we were primarily looking at out-of-state degrees, but there was a desire at the time to include in-state degrees, and had I had my futuristic hat on, I would have said, well, we need a transition phase, because of the California schools. But at the time, we thought that the schools were already in compliance with the LPCC program. I think it still goes without saying that part of having a clinical license includes assessment and diagnosis. So I think those are really core components if you're going to provide psychotherapeutic services. And with respect to what's typically missing when we look at those transcripts, whether it be in-state or out-of-state, either they're missing the entire course or 2 courses, they're just absent, or they're getting a portion of what we require here in California. And we determine that not by a degree title, but we determine that by the submission of the syllabus. And staff reviews it. If we have questions about it, we refer it to our subject matter expert who specializes in academic curriculum review. And if it doesn't pass the muster, then we just don't let them in, because they lack that core competency to provide the psychotherapeutic services. So that's just, I'm only stating that to answer your question about what's missing on the degree transcript when we see it, as well as to provide some background for some of the members on the committee so they know what we're coming from. And have I missed anything, ladies? Okay.
I'd like to chime in on that too. With regards to the out-of-state, the reason that I didn't propose option 3 for out-of-state was for a couple of reasons. Number one, out-of-state applicants are allowed to remediate up to 6 core content areas, which is quite a lot. So I think that the law seems to be sort of doing what it's intended. The second reason is that the license portability is looking at if the individual is licensed in the other state, that we would be under that proposal. If that proposal goes through, we would accept without looking at each educational course. So if they weren't licensed in another state and they were coming with an out-of-state degree, they would still need to qualify and have assessment and diagnosis. But if they could somehow get a clinical licensure in that other state, then they could come here with that. So that's in the pipeline.
I just have a question, and thank you. Actually, you answered one of my questions. The other is, what's the timeline on the License Portability Committee's review, and when will they provide this or complete their work?
February 23rd, we're going to look at some draft prototype language, and that's just going to be a prototype for LPCC, so we can really just look at one and focus on one and drill that down. And then depending on the committee's direction, we will make some tweaks and possibly start drafting the other 2 license types as well.
My goal is to get to seek legislation next year.
So just one point to clarify. So if, let's say, for the out-of-state applicants, right now it's 6 core content.
Yes.
So if we add, diagnosis and assessment, that will be 8 out of the 13.
No, that would include, you could, right now you can't remediate assessment or diagnosis.
Right, I know.
So if the number of courses you can remediate would remain the same, but we would allow them to remediate assessments.
course content,
Right.
Okay, got it.
I think
Yes.
to respond to Kim's comment, I don't think we would be advocating newly licensed people where the rest of the degree did not match what we would expect for a clinical counselor. I'm hearing from applicants who've been turned down because the assessment course didn't meet our definition. So that's what I was wondering. If they have an assessment course and it doesn't meet our definition of assessment, and everything else is looking pretty good, are we going to deny that degree and send somebody back for a whole new degree?
Yeah, we would.
Broaden our definition of assessment, or allow them to remediate so we know that they have the assessment that we had in mind.
Now, part of the assessment that I have seen, and I'm working particularly with a couple of different applicants, they have one or two components of what's specified in law, but they don't have the rest of it. So it's like
one course or the whole
course. It's a 3-unit course that's required, and so they have maybe one or two topic areas that align with what we have defined in law, but they're missing the other components of that. And so that's why we asked for the syllabus, because then we can see exactly what that course contains. There have been assessment courses that we've deemed that qualify, but weren't necessarily titled assessment, primarily because we could look at the syllabus and see that that met our definition. What we're finding is it's primarily in the art therapy and the dance therapy degrees, primarily out of New York, where they get sort of a flavor of assessment, and it's simply just a flavor. It's not the whole package, as it were. And those are the ones that are very insistent that they do meet, because the title says assessment. But that's the challenge that we're running into. I mean, and it's not that we're arbitrarily saying no, no, no. Honest to gosh, we are looking at these applications probably 3 and 4 times, and looking at the coursework, looking at the descriptions, looking at what's entailed, what's encompassed in that, before we say no. I mean, when we say no, it's been vetted at least 3 or 4 times, and it's gone through the evaluators, it's gone through our subject matter experts. I'm taking a look at it, not that I'm the end-all academic person, and then we have a meeting and we talk about what's in that course, and is that satisfying the requirements specified in law. And if the discussion ends up being the result is no, then we have to deny them.
Are they being denied because of that one inadequate course?
It's that, and it could encompass a couple of other things. They might be, but they need that course within their degree program if they're going to provide clinical services in California. That puts it on par with the rest of the mental health licenses that we have. So to allow one profession to come through and remediate those 2 core components and none of the other ones, it seems imbalanced to me.
I want to jump
I don't think we'd do it for just one profession. I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's when we look at the numbers,
I want to jump in just really quick and say that the definitions that we use of assessment and diagnosis that I included in the memo are exactly what's in law. So when our subject matter expert and our licensing staff look at what needs to be contained in an assessment and diagnosis course, what you see written on page 131 there is exactly what they look for.
And that's the KCREP definitions that
Right.
we have used. That's our national accredited
and Dean,
body.
just to let you know, some of the schools that we're saying no to aren't KCREP accredited from the out of state. I mean, the ones that are coming through KCREP that have that accreditation. I mean, that's generally not a problem for those applicants. It's the applicants that have gone another way to another school and are now find themselves here in California and think that they can have licensure.
Yeah, and of course in New York, they do have a license for the creative arts therapies. So I think that's why a lot of programs are there.
Right.
But we didn't do that here in California. But I must say the dance movement therapists and the art therapists and the rehab counselors, the school counselors, were all part of our coalition to get this license. And they said they could have the core requirements. And I think most of them do. In fact, I see a rehab. Did I see a rehab? Well, we don't need to get into that, but I think if we can find a way that art therapists and dance movement therapists can get licensed in California, they do provide services working with psychiatrists and hospitals. You know, we went through that in 2015. So I just thought I'd bring it up again to see if maybe their assessment course wasn't just meeting our definition. Could we broaden our definition in order to include those people rather than deny them licensure?
Thank you, Dean. Any other public comments? Okay, so do we have a motion? So, right, so, so we got three options. So take no action, remove the, prohibition on remediation or allow in-state applicants, within a short period of time. So what is the inclination of the board members? I personally, I would go for option 3 so that, we can allow those, California, we can start with that, allow the California courses that's, able to, do just one time, and get your acts together, those older degrees, remediate, but that's just me. So and Kim?
I think I'm empathetic to the situation. If you open it back up and allow in-state, you're going to hear from the out-of-state applicants that want to do it as well. And so where do you draw the line? I think really the discussion is, do you really believe, as we did in 2015, that assessment and diagnosis are critical components of a degree to provide clinical services and psychotherapeutic services, which was the decision at that time, knowing that decisions and situations change. I mean, if that's still the case, then there really isn't a need to open it back up at all, because then what we have in law is doing what it's supposed to do, protecting consumers, and that, ensuring that those individuals have the core competencies that we need to provide psychotherapeutic services. So that's my comment on all of that. But understand, if you open it up to in-state, you are going to hear from the out-of-state saying that's not fair. Why do they get to do A, B, and C, but I don't? Not that life is fair or not fair, but that is going to be the push that you have. And in terms of, what staff and their thoughts and kind of our observations after looking at all of that, well, if I had to put it out there, I think my guess is that they would go for option 1 because they feel like it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes.
Okay. Even if option 3 was not something that was approved, isn't that going to be visited in the portability? So it's not like if you don't vote for it today, it's something that is going to come up. It has to come up. I mean, that's the path of that subcommittee, is to look at all of these things. And I think that, as the profession continues to change, you've got telehealth coming on, you've got all of these other things, you've got the path, we've got you sitting at all kinds of national in national organizations, looking at pathways going all the way across the country. I just want to make sure that even if we don't vote for that, option 3, that's not like long gone. This is something that's going to be addressed in the portability committee.
For out-of-state, yes.
Yes.
For out-of-state. For in-state, now the in-state individuals might have an option of going to another state, taking their degree and getting licensure there. I'm not sure how other states would look at, for example, the degree from Laverne, and whether they would let them remediate or not remediate. I'm not that far into the weeds on that, but generally, because the schools are in California and we have set the licensure standards in the schools, if they want a degree program that leads to licensure, establish a curriculum that leads to that. We can't influence the out-of-state schools, but through the licensure portability process, the pathway could be if that California graduate an educated individual got licensed in Nevada, held that license for 2 years, then came back to California to apply, and we adopted the portability standards, then they could qualify for licensure. We wouldn't be looking at what your transcript had, because you already qualified for licensure at the highest clinical level in another state. And that's the benchmark that they're going to have to meet, is the clinical level. There are other states, in particular with LPCCs, that license at only using the counselor education exam. We use the counselor mental health exam, and there's 2 different exams. And some states have a 2-tiered licensure for LPCCs. So it just depends on what that state allows within the scope of practice in their laws.
Roseanne?
I do want to make it clear with option 3, though. So the License Portability Committee is addressing out-of-state applicants. Option 3 is addressing in-state applicants. We aren't going to be addressing the in-state issues with the Portability Committee. So just to make sure that everybody understands that.
Yes, go ahead.
And I think as far as licensure and accepting assessment and diagnosis, we are all on the same page. There is not a clinical license to be had that cannot accept assessment and diagnosis. However, it was sort of the remediation portion that is the issue. The fact that they don't have that option to go in and address it when they thought up until that point, they had until 2018. Those students that have returned to us that were actually in the process, in some cases, of completing those issues as of January 1st, were told they were no longer eligible. So they're in the middle of completing it and told that's not going to happen. So that is our big dilemma, and where we were hoping that we could come with some consensus to address those students who will have assessment, diagnosis, substance, they'll have their practicum hours, everything will be included in that.
Okay. Do you have the option of reopening your degree program?
Don't. I know we had kind of I worked with Steve Tierney on it, and we sort of addressed all of that. The university will not reopen a degree.
Okay.
Cannot do. We also readdressed, we have one student who said, fine, I'll come back and do 60 units, which we all went, you just finished 4 years ago or completed everything, and you're going to take classes you took 4 years ago in order to get that 60-unit program. The university has strict standards on how many classes they will take in. So if this were not on the table, I would be asking what other classes would be acceptable in a new 60-unit program, so this poor student wouldn't have to take the same thing again. So that's sort of what we're looking at.
I know that we've had some discussions with some schools where they have been able to reopen the degree program, and it has not run into any concerns with WASC. So.
Actually, I think it's from what I understood, it's the state-approved schools, the BPP-approved schools that can reopen.
Okay.
It's WASC that does not allow it.
Yeah, no, WASC did. There was WASC didn't have a concern.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
I've got that backwards.
yeah.
Okay.
So Kim, what you're saying, if I understand it right, is that the applicant who are deficient possibly can go back to the school and get that remediate, and put them in a transcript, and that will make them eligible?
Well, they have two options: either get a new degree that has assessment and diagnosis in the degree program, which is thrilling to anybody who completed a master's degree, to have to go back and get another one. Alternatively, we've worked and talked with some schools, and they have been able to reopen the degree program. So then the student goes back to school, completes that coursework, and then the school reissues the degree. They reissue the degree, and the degree issue date is after the completion of the other course. Some schools are absolutely resistant to that. The registrar won't let them do that. We've had a couple of schools where they've been successful in doing that, but it's on a limited basis. So
it looks like, so for the out-of-state applicants, if they're deficient right now, and if they're able to stay at their state and get the license, and down the road, there's always that possibility that, when California, change our law, then they're able to, just come in without making up, the deficiency. And then the California, unfortunately, they can't go out of state, and then, well, they can, but they could, but that would be the option for them, if, what you talk about, getting a new degree or reopening up the degree, doesn't work for them.
Right.
Okay. No question? Okay. All right. Any other comments? Lots of information on the table. Yep. So, any suggestion? Oh, Dean, go ahead.
It just seems out of fairness that we should follow 4999.32 that allows the, people to remediate through 2018. I don't think we realized that when we made this adjustment and just went back into that older section and imposed a new deadline. It just doesn't seem fair, and I don't think we meant to do that. So I would hope we could adopt option 3.
I would agree that the transition was rather abrupt. We typically, when we make changes like that, we do include some kind of transition time period. This was one of those situations where, I'm going to take the hit. I mean, I overlooked it. So there is that. But to our point, I believe we made every effort to notify the schools on at least 3 different occasions before the law went into effect to advise them that this law was coming. And we can only notify the schools based on the information that we have at the time. And I know that our enforcement manager personally sent out notification to the schools that this was coming in addition to our staff. So yes, we missed the boat on this one. But
I guess my one question would be, if we went with option 3 and people were allowed to remediate in state, would that give us the type of therapist that the law intended in the first place?
Well, I think when we had the discussions back in 2015, if I recall correctly, maybe Roseanne's memory's better than mine, but assessment and diagnosis is taken in part of your degree program, and then you go on to your practicum. That's where you sort of put everything into play. So now you're talking about an individual that's completed their degree program, has completed the practicum portion of it, and then they're going to get the other half. So there's, yes, they're going to get the coursework, but are they going to get the practical application to go with it that typically prepares someone? So that being said, someone who comes through a full program and has those 2 components in it doesn't necessarily ensure that we're going to have a law-abiding licensee. I mean, it's
right.
It's the individual.
Well, I'm not even talking about law abiding, I'm just talking about quality.
Yeah,
The board felt pretty strongly at the time, my recollection, that assessment, in fact, we originally opposed it just for out of state, and the board decided to impose it for in-state as well. So it was a pretty strong consensus that it should be in the degree.
Okay.
And I remember I was part of that discussion. So I'm wondering also, now when we look at the in-state So the missing content area, it looks like a lot of them are about diagnosis.
Right.
Majority of them is, just only 2 schools, are the assessments. So what about the other content area? When they have missing like this, do you look at, the other content area, or do they fulfill their?
Yeah, they fulfill the content. If they're missing, assuming you come to us with assessment and diagnosis in your degree program, if typically what we see, it's I want to say, which component, is it the education counseling piece? Yeah. Yeah, and the career counseling piece that tends to be missing sometimes for remediation, is that the most? Yeah. So some of the coursework that's missing is pertinent to the degree and relevant to the degree, but not necessarily and I might be going on a limb, you guys can hit me later, not necessarily, the clinical pieces of it. Not necessarily. I think if I recall from speaking with Terry, most of the degree programs are missing the career counseling core content area, and they remediate that.
Tamara?
Thank you. My initial, as I was reading through all the information, recommendation was to support item number 1. But I think just given a lot of the discussion and a couple of questions that I still have, and it looks like other people still have, about what might come out of the License Portability Committee, my recommendation would be that we postpone a vote on this item until we get some additional information. I think it might be a little too early for us to address this. I know that there's some concerns about timing with the December 2018 timeframe, but I still think there's some more information that we need.
Well, the 2018 timeframe is gone. It's totally gone. Yeah, because we did the law and didn't do the transition period. Yeah, so we essentially, they can't remediate it now. So, but
What they're referring to is the Business and Professions Code section 4999.32 is for older degrees, people who started graduate school before August 2012. So the argument there is that they thought they would be able to still complete through that program, but we actually changed the content area requirements for that. So the changes apply as of today. They're not. That's what the requirement is now, but that's the concern you're hearing about the 2018.
So, any other discussion? So which option that are we leaning towards, or we want to delay it?
Well, I don't understand how if we delay it to get more information, which I'm always for, that's not going to address the in-state issue, right? Because the portability group is only working on out-of-state issues.
Right.
So it seems like we ought to be able to make a recommendation.
So even if the committee is only dealing with that, could they also address some of the discussion that we're having today as part of their larger overall?
For portability,
for inclusion?
Probably not, because this is a really unique situation. Essentially what this did is, these individuals were on one pathway and I can remediate everything or most everything. And then midstream, what happened is that we changed the requirements and said, well, yeah, you can remediate anything but assessment and diagnosis. That's it. What we failed to do is put in a transition period for the in-state. So when you look at the application today, as a result of that law change, it is doing what it's supposed to do for the out-of-state, meaning you don't piecemeal a clinical degree together. But it did impact those individuals currently in school going back under the previous law that says, yeah, you can remediate those 2 courses. So what we're seeing now are applicants who had finished a degree in, say, educational counseling, and then said, oh, I could get licenses in LPCC, so I'm going to do that, and I have to finish it by 2018, and I can remediate the coursework I'm missing. They still can do that, but the 2 courses that cannot remediate any longer is assessment and or diagnosis.
So these people started working toward that, and then midstream we said, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's not going to work if you need to remediate
Exactly.
assessment.
That's exactly the situation.
That doesn't seem quite fair.
Yeah, it was one of those, like I said, I failed to put in a transition period.
It seems like option 3 would fix
Option
that
3
issue.
would do that if you open it up for a short time, as proposed in option 3. I think it's opening, which means we would run legislation in 19.
Well, no, I want
No?
to talk about that because that's the other, the timing of this is tricky because the legislative deadline to introduce anything is next Friday. So I could, this is simple enough that I could try to place it in this year's omnibus bill, which is my thought if we went with option 3. We have another bill that's sort of loosely related. I might be able to get it in there if the omnibus bill doesn't work. CalPIC might be able to have a vehicle, in which case if the board didn't sponsor it, then we could take a position on it. But it's kind of tricky this time of year not having a designated vehicle.
How would it qualify for the omnibus bill?
Well, it's
Because
kind of
an oversight or kind of a
it's kind of a
mistake, or-
technical change. It's just
Yeah.
going back, but I don't know for
Yeah.
sure if it would. And we don't have board approval to go forward with that right now.
Right.
So I could ask, or I could try to put it in our other bill, but there is no guarantee. There's not 100% guarantee right now with running legislation at this time of the year that we're going to be able to get a vehicle for it right away.
Right.
Right.
So Roseanne, now, in that case, when we, when the proposed time is January 1st, 2020, considering also the legislative process, how long actually, the applicant would have in order to remediate?
We would make sure based on, whether if it was this year, so the draft there is assuming that it went as legislation this year, it would become effective January 1, 2019. So they would have 1 year. If it had to get pushed to next year, if we were not able to find a vehicle for it, then we would need to extend that 1 year out.
Right. So basically, it's 1 year window time, for
Yes.
those to, to remediate. And that would probably take care of that, that transition issue, apart from the.
It would take care of the applicant sort of caught in the middle.
Right.
So what we would see is everyone who's been holding back, plus everybody else that was denied. And so they'd have that 1 year to do it. And if you don't get it in by the last day of the 1 year, we wouldn't take it. Right. It would be, here's your opportunity, take advantage of it now. I don't know that it would, do you anticipate a significant workload increase, Terry? Mild, normal? Okay, all right. So, yeah, staff's not sure.
So the 21 as of October 2017, when we pulled the data, those people could come back and do a brand new application. And then any people that just held back as well. And also there's probably been some between now and between right now and October. So 21 is not a huge number, but if there's a lot of people that have held back, it could add to that.
So the other thought that I have is, what about, I know that there are curriculum changes, for the LPCC. So what about, put a, timeline that, if you get a degree before, certain year, will that also, stop the floodgate or?
No, it
Just an
just
idea.
means it just means that you just have that 1 year. That's it.
No, what I'm talking about is the degree earned,
Right.
Time, yeah.
Well, they have that now. They qualify either under, I think it's 0.32 or 0.33.
Right, the problem with doing that is that's kind of a different topic, because then if you're doing it by older degrees, the board at the time decided that anybody with assessment and diagnosis, we want them to have assessment and diagnosis in the degree. People coming in from out of state, a lot of those are going to have older degrees. And so we had wanted assessment and diagnosis in there.
But just for the in-state.
It's just, yeah, the option,
The in-state, yeah.
yeah, option 3 is just in-state only.
Yeah, right, so.
So you're opening it up to schools that are, pretty much listed on that list and their students to come back through.
Yeah, because I'm looking at the, in-state school, a lot of them, they're older. They really
Yeah.
are older degree, except there are 2 that, graduated in 2017, or there's one, 2014. or 13.
So yeah, it would be a lot larger population that could decide eventually to remediate. So those people, if we opened it up for a year, it's going to let a limited number of people that were working. If we opened it up for everybody with a degree as of before a certain date, then it opens, then that's an option that then anybody at some point who decided to come back and remediate that could. So.
So where do we go from there? Option 1, 2, or 3? We have a pretty lengthy discussion about option 3, and the pros and cons.
Christy, you are the singular clinician on this committee. So what are your thoughts?
Wow. What I'm really hearing, so I'm actually looking at the degree, programs, and a lot of them are really about the school counseling part of it. And so I'm thinking about, they're not necessarily the LEP people, and yet, they are working with kids. And, and so when I'm thinking about, consumer protection wise, that I think one of the big issue is about, the school counselors, that, or the school, people working in the school may not necessarily need a license. So if we let, this group of people come in, then at least they get an LPCC, I think the consumer protection wise, it will be a little bit, better. We accomplished that mission. And yes, I also understand, where Kim's, the concern coming from. It's, because I don't know particularly, what other content, whether they are, really more, not mental health per se, so, because LPCC, you're really talking about, the mental health versus, the school counseling. So, so I can understand why, and I can go either way, but I just also want to, part of it is, I think part of the problem is also coming from, the part that's, the transition period. So I'm trying to find out, to me, it's only fair that, if it's, if we didn't give the applicant enough, time, to remediate, how can we actually put it in a way that we have a small number of people, we're not opening up the floodgate.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm thinking.
Well, it would be, obviously the schools would promote that. You have 1 year. And they can submit their application, but at the end of the day, the applicant has 1 year to remediate that course. The challenge is going to be, are they going to be able to get that course in the 1 year? And then that's something we can't control.
Absolutely.
But they have the option if they want to take advantage of it.
And then they have to get it back to their school. No, I take it back. So if we allow them to remediate, and that could be for any provider that approve.
Yeah, they can take it from, it would have to be a 3-unit graduate course.
Just like a core content area, they would have to, yeah.
Yeah. So we could open it. I think, there'll probably be some schools on board that would be able to provide that course in that time frame.
Right.
There's probably going to be a challenge with some folks who didn't know about the law and then they just find out about it. But we always have that.
Yes.
I can't. We can put the information out there. I can't always make you read it. So.
Absolutely. So I guess that, the real big question is that if let's say we allow these in-state, to basically kind of, offer a solution to the abrupt transition, will that really increase, the workload of the staff, or, or do you anticipate like all of a sudden we have thousands of more applications?
No, I don't think so. Not for this program. I think what you're going to see is a lot of folks resubmitting their application, and you'll see a lot of, assessment and or diagnosis outside of the degree program because they were able to remediate it. I think you'll see that. That'll be one component. The other component is you're going to get applications that are deficient because they don't have it, but then they have a year to make it up. So that's annually we get. We're at what? Almost 3,000 LPCCs total. So
that's about right.
About right, yeah.
So if I safely assume that, these, pool of applicant, because they're not fresh graduate, they've been working, in the field, and let's say they work in school, it's just basically getting them to the door for the registration, and they
Right.
still have to, get a supervisor and all those things in
Right.
order to accumulate their
Right.
hours.
Yeah, this just lets them qualify for licensure. This doesn't give them the license.
Right, exactly. Right, right. So they just basically get them to the door, and then
Right.
they can start accumulating the
Right.
hours, and and then just they have to find supervision, that kind of stuff.
Right.
Right. So yeah. So it looks like to me that if it really doesn't increase too much of this the staff load, and will option 3 be a good possibility? Yeah.
I'm leaning toward recommending option 3 to the boards simply because this seems the right thing to do from a process point of view. But then again, I'm looking forward to the discussion when all the clinicians are here to hear, and also to give the stakeholders a little bit more time to shore up their arguments on those areas that we're concerned about. So I'm leaning toward recommending option.
And we're
3.
also, recommending to the full board, and we will have another chance to, to fully discuss it. And so, if we, know that this is an option, maybe Dean, and you can also give some more information. Staff can do a little bit more research, and then we can rediscuss it at the full board meeting, about the direction to go.
This is on the board meeting agenda for
Yeah, it is on the,
February, yes.
right, so it is on the board, so, yeah. So does it sound like a good option, option 3? Yep. And I will need a motion,
I'll move to recommend to the board option 3.
and I can second that. You'll be the third. No, Deb, you can second, it's fine. Okay, so any other discussion? Okay, we're ready to vote.
Deborah Brown? Samara Ashley?
Yes.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlis-Bach?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So it's 11:14. Would, any need to have another physiological break? Yeah, it would take a break? Okay, all right. So let's do the next item. So the next one is LPCC applicant core content requirements, and it's Roseanne again.
Okay, so this is another request by CalPIC and LPCC stakeholders. I will ahead of time note this is a bigger item, so it is not on the board agenda for next week or the week after. So because it's a bigger item, we do not have a vehicle for it at this point, but it would require a legislative change if approved. So just stating that up front. But current law requires LPCC applicants to have the equivalent of at least 3 semester units or 4.5 quarter units of graduate coursework in the specified core content areas to qualify for a license. So generally, the standard is that 1 academic semester unit is considered equal to 1.5 quarter units. Therefore, 3 semester units are equivalent to 4.5 quarter units. The number of core content areas an LPCC applicant must complete varies based on when the degree was completed. There's 9 required core content areas for an in-state applicant with older degrees. 2 areas can be remediated outside of the degree. And then there are 13 required core content areas for in-state applicants with newer degrees begun after 2012. 3 areas can be remediated for those applicants. Out-of-state applicants must have the entire 13 core content areas, but up to 6 of those may be remediated outside of the degree. So what the issue is that stakeholders have a concern that there are some applicants that are ineligible for licensure because they are missing a 0.5 of a quarter unit from several core content areas. It's rare for a degree program to offer courses in 0.5 unit increments. So for an example, we could see an out-of-state applicant who had 4 quarter units in all of the 13 core content areas that is ineligible for a license because only 6 core content areas can be remediated. Relevant coursework integrated elsewhere within the degree can be used in some cases to help the applicant become eligible, but only if that coursework is not already being accounted toward fulfilling another requirement. So it's less common for an in-state applicant, but it could present for an in-state applicant as well. And they're only allowed to remediate 2 or 3 core content areas, depending on when the degree was obtained. However, schools in California are aware of this potential pitfall and have arranged for their degree programs to accommodate the board's requirements. I took a look at some past legislation to see what was considered when the LPCC license type was being discussed, and it was discussed over a period of about a decade. SB 788 was the bill that was ultimately successful in achieving the LPCC license. And I reviewed various, and that was in 2009, by the way. I reviewed various iterations of SB 788 from when it was introduced in February 2009 until it was signed by the governor in October 2009. And the amount of core content coursework was consistently set at 3 semester or 4.5 quarter units. So there was no discussion or concern at the time about that. I think everybody just thought that that was okay in the discussion, or it wasn't thought about. Before the passage of SB 788, there were some other attempts to achieve the LPCC license. There was a bill in 2007, 2008, AB 1486, that had the same 3 semester, 4.5 quarter unit requirement, and a previous bill in 2005, 2006 did as well. I looked at how other states require their LPCC applicants to complete core content coursework. There's a selection of states listed in your packet. Arizona has 8 required content areas. Their law states that an applicant must have 3 semester or 4 quarter credit hour courses in each area. Colorado has 8, but they only require 2 graduate semester hours or 3 graduate quarter hours in each area. Florida is the same as Arizona. It's 12 content areas with 3 semester units or 4 quarter hours. A couple of other states have required content areas, but no specific number of units. Massachusetts also has the 3 semester credits or 4 quarter units. And Texas doesn't really specify quarter units. It just says 10 core content areas, 3 semester hours each. So the recommendation for discussion today is whether the 0.5 quarter unit creates a barrier to licensure. Some possible solutions would be to consider removing the 0.5 quarter unit and just having the requirement to be 3 semester or 4 quarter units, as some other states do. That creates a little bit of inequity in terms of the hours, but other states seem to do it. We could work on a requirement that the 0.5 quarter units can be remediated across core content areas if just that's missing. Or we could wait till the License Portability Committee completes its work, at least for people that are already licensed. If we go through with the proposal we're talking about in that committee, somebody who's already obtained an out-of-state license would not have that issue because we would not look at their individual coursework units. So, and then if anybody has any other solutions they'd like to discuss, definitely open to that as well.
Or Christine?
So this is one that I think we probably could and probably should wait for the Portability Committee to weigh in on, because I think this might be resolved with their work.
It's definitely a possibility. So Roseanne, do you anticipate that, that would be also a discussion item for portability? And that would also just take care of the out-state, but not the in-state.
It would just take care of the out-of-state. It's not as much of a problem, from my understanding, for in-state, because the in-state schools, we have a relationship with them. They've worked with us. They have it built into their program. If they're quarter units, they have it worked out. It's more of an issue with the out-of-state, and that could be remedied under the proposal we're looking at for the License Portability Committee. If that person had an out-of-state license, we're not going to look at their coursework. So it wouldn't necessarily, I don't know if it would be a discussion item. It would be kind of taken care of unless they came in without an out-of-state license. But if they weren't able to achieve that, then that's kind of a separate issue. So it could be, if the Portability Committee is successful in its proposal, this issue could be at least reduced
Right, absolutely. So I'm actually really interested in hearing this from the stakeholders, whether that 0.5 is indeed a barrier.
Thank you. When our bill, to respond to something in Roseanne's analysis, I can tell you that when our bill was in the legislature, we accepted that 4.5 quarter units was the equivalent to 3 semester units, because that's what the math indicated. A semester unit is 3 hours, and quarter unit is 15 hours, and a quarter unit is 10 hours. So the math demonstrated that. And also, that's what the BBS, who was advising us and commenting on our bill, that's what they said we needed to do. So we didn't really question it. But once the bill became law and transcripts were received, we learned that no university deals in half-quarter units. So this half-quarter unit, which is really 5 hours of instruction, has been a problem from the beginning. Now, in the past, applicants were able to use a half-quarter unit from another course, although not one of the core courses. But if they could pull 5 hours of instruction from something else on their transcript, they were able to get that half a unit, quarter unit. But I understand the BBS is no longer doing that or accepting that. And it's not a good solution anyway, because it's very time consuming and complicated for both the applicant and the evaluator. Now, along the way, Capella University devised a course for California applicants that had a half a quarter unit for all of our core units in one course, which resolved it for their students. But because we don't allow that half a quarter unit to be remediated post-degree, even taking that Capella course doesn't help people who have already graduated and have their transcript. And we know of no university that will accept more than 6 units toward a new degree, although we learned something from Kim today. We'll have to find out what universities will open up their degree. But it's just devastating when applicants with these 4-quarter unit courses are told they have to get a whole new degree, because that's really next to impossible, and from a financial standpoint too. As you know, it's thousands of dollars that have been invested in degrees. While the License Portability Committee's work may resolve this issue for those who've been licensed in another state for a certain period of time, I think we're talking about you have to have been licensed for maybe 2 years or it would kick in. It won't resolve the issue for those who move to California before they get licensed. So CalPIC recommends that we follow the lead of the other states as described in option 1 and require 3 semester units or 4 quarter units for our requirements. Universities with 4 quarter unit courses have simply divided the pie differently than those with 3 semester units. As long as the transcript has the total number of units, they've just spread them around differently. So we don't find a problem with that, and we probably should have made this change a long time ago, even in the writing of the bill. It was just something that was a mistake, really. I do have a comment from a person who is affected by this, who would have liked to have been here today but could not. Am I permitted to read a comment? No, it's short.
Okay.
Dear committee members, I'm writing to share my personal experience of being denied licensure by the California Board of Behavioral Sciences due to the half-quarter unit issue described in the memo before this committee and voice my support for an adjustment to these requirements. I am a California resident who relocated from Illinois as a licensed clinical professional counselor in good standing for more than 5 years. I hold a master's degree in counseling from DePaul University and have passionately practiced in various clinical mental health settings. My education and experience met all requirements outlined by the BBS except for the missing half-quarter hours in several core content areas with no path to remediation. This is due to my university operating on the quarter-hour system as opposed to semesters. As the memo indicates, it's indeed rare for a degree program to offer courses in half-quarter unit increments, and my university is no exception. Consequently, I've been barred from licensure in my new home state of California. There are no courses I could take to remediate the deficient areas, essentially making the only path forward to repeating the degree. This has not only directly affected my livelihood, but the ability to serve the community. I chose this career to affect change and advocate for those who often have no voice. I hope you will consider granting me and those in similar situations the opportunity to continue supporting the citizens of California who need it the most. I strongly encourage the members of this committee to either allow the removal of the half-quarter unit requirement for each core content area, or allow the half-quarter unit requirement to be remediated across all content areas if missing. Respectfully, Alice Redmond, LCPC. Fortunately, she is an example of a person who could benefit from what we're planning to do in the Portability Committee. But I think we also need to thinking about those who arrive in California, often not by choice. You know, we have military spouses or, a lot of reasons that people come to California and they haven't gotten licensed in their home state. So I think we need to think of them too.
Thank you so much, Dean. So, any other comments? So I do recall that, we talked about, the 3-semester unit and then, oh yeah, let's do the math, 4.5, and without really thinking that, that 0.5, may not be offered, by the university. And so, I think this is a very realistic issue. And so it looks like, that 0.5, does create, the barrier. And so I'm thinking that, if let's say, Dean did the math for us, so 5.5 hours, 0.5 units is equivalent to 5 hours of the instruction time, right? So, so I guess that, I'm wondering, so now that, I have a daughter who actually in the quarter system, it's some new learning for me that, to be honest, I'm really not seeing, any difference between, a semester, three unit semester versus 4 units of quarter. I really don't see any difference because, they are just way more jam-packed, full of assignments and the pace go faster. So, if that, my inclination is that, if instruction-wise, that 5 hours is not making much difference, in terms of their competency and their knowledge, and they graduate, and, the school said that they are, they cover, the areas. So I don't see any reason why we cannot remove that 0.5, to just make it, make it more accessible and, reachable for the applicants. Comments? That's my take. Board members? Okay with what I said? Okay. Okay, I'm moving it fast. So, in that case, shall we make a motion? Or what? Roseanne.
This is a little bit complicated because it's kind of a bigger, I think it would require a bill, and we don't have a vehicle at this point, so we didn't put it on the agenda item for February board, which we already had to release. Is that correct, Kim? Yeah. So options would be, we can either table it to May and try to amend it into something and have it next year, or if CalPIC has the vehicle and we let them go forward with it, if they were willing to do so, then the board could take a position on it.
Otherwise, you're looking at next year for legislation.
Would that be a problem if we look at it for next year? Because it's not something that, urgently, you can, you need to get it done, or, it doesn't seem like a very emergent issue, because if
it pops up periodically, and I think what happens too is it's not just 1 or 2 courses where they're missing 4.5, it's everything.
Right.
It's everything. So if you only got 4 units instruction in 13 courses, and you're missing the 0.5, you now have exceeded the 6 courses you can remediate, or the 3 courses. So, yeah, it's kind of,
it is a
and
math
Dean made a
problem.
good point about, the 4 quarter units, as long as the unit total is, comparable.
I have a legal sort of
You
question.
guys have a vehicle?
GVRs with CalPIC. We do not have, but we expect to have.
You expect to have. Okay. I like that.
So what we would encourage you to do is go ahead and go forward with it. And if something comes up,
and
be acceptable or workable with that. We would gladly include it.
All righty.
And, I don't know, you might want to consider also seeing if this would go in an omnibus bill.
We have to have those amendments in.
We would
there?
help to make that, we would work to help make that happen too.
Okay.
We can't get, because this seems like a bigger issue, and because the other issue was much more urgent, we put the prior agenda item on the February board meeting, but not this one. And so we can't get board approval for it to do it this year. And we don't, they're being pretty picky about what's going in the Omni bill. I think it's too based on what the stuff I've seen rejected, I think it would be too substantial. Not saying we couldn't try. So I would say we could proceed forward and direct it to go to board in May and try as an Omni, or try for next year. It's just the timing of this in terms of legislation is a little off.
Well, I would just suggest that you don't make it so narrow that it could not be considered.
Exactly. Well, and I think too, if the committee makes a recommendation to bring it to the board in May, and if you happen to find a vehicle, then at that point we would be able to consider that vehicle and put, determine a position on it.
We could
So,
take a position.
yeah.
My one question is sort of a legal question, is that how would that apply retroactively? Would we just change the units and then move forward, and anybody could reapply?
I think they would reapply, wouldn't they?
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So applications received after, so everybody that got rejected on the 0.5, they would just resubmit.
And we do have another PNA meeting in April.
Right.
So, so we can actually, table it, and have the stakeholders, work with the staff, for the next,
Okay.
and bring it back, and maybe, we can actually have something, to discuss in the May board meeting.
We could it would either at that point, it would be for May board meeting. If they didn't get a bill, then if they got a bill, we would, at the April PNA meeting, we would present the bill for our position. So it's kind of doing it backwards from what we usually do. Or if not, then we could move it forward in April and try for the Omni bill, or try to amend it into something else in May. Okay.
Defer the discussion till the April PNA?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we defer this discussion until our April PNA meeting.
Okay. And I need a second. I'll second it. Fine. Wonderful. So any other discussion? So the motion is, to defer it to the next PNA meeting, to allow staff and stakeholder to collaborate.
Okay.
So any other discussion? Okay, we're ready for vote.
Deborah Brown? Her answer was yes. Okay.
All right. Yes.
Mara Ashley?
Yes.
No Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Whitlisbach?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. So I'm thinking that now the time is 11:37. So maybe we should what?
Oh, I was ready to go to the other ones. I was just going to ask for 5 minutes. That's all.
Oh, okay. So and that's what I want to open to the board members.
I don't even
5
need
minutes
5.
break.
Give me a good
Okay.
3.
Okay. Okay. So we're gonna go in break. So the time is 11:37, and let's come back at 11:45 on time. Thank you.